What if I told you that one single moment set the stage for the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen? A moment so brief, so seemingly inconsequential, that it might have been overlooked in the rush of daily life. And yet, this event, a single act of violence, would spark a series of decisions, mistakes, and failures that would consume the entire globe. In June 28, 1914, the world stands on the brink of a new century, full of promise, innovation, and progress. But in the heart of Sarajevo, something unexpected is about to unfold, something that will tear that fragile promise apart. The morning begins like any other. Crowds gather on the streets, waving flags and cheering as a motorcade weaves its way through the city. At the center of it, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, sits beside his wife, Sophie. They smile, acknowledging the crowd, unaware that their every movement is being watched. Among the spectators stands a young man, his hands trembling, concealed within his coat. He is not here to cheer. He is here for something far more calculated. Inside his pocket, a weapon, a pistol, rests, waiting for its moment. The motorcade slows. The Archduke's car makes a wrong turn, an innocent mistake. The opportunity is now. The young man steps forward, and then it happens. A single gunshot pierces the air, then another. The crowd freezes. Franz Ferdinand collapses, clutching his chest, his white uniform now crimson. Sophie falls beside him, lifeless. The cheers turn to screams. Panic erupts in the streets. What no one yet realizes is that these two shots have done more than end the lives of a royal couple. They have lit a fuse that will ignite the greatest conflict the world has ever seen. Within weeks, nations will fall into chaos, alliances will be tested, and millions of lives will hang in the balance. This is not just the story of an assassination. It is the story of how one moment, one decision, became the spark for war on an unimaginable scale. This is the July Crisis. This is the beginning of World War I. The year is 1914. Europe is a continent of contradictions. Its cities hum with progress. Its people bask in the glow of modernization. Yet beneath the surface, hidden from the eyes of most, lies a fragile peace. For decades, the great powers have maneuvered carefully, like players in a high-stakes game, each nation striving for dominance while seeking to avoid outright conflict. At the heart of this uneasy peace is a dangerous balance of power, an arrangement of alliances that binds nations together in mutual distrust. Germany, young and ambitious, yearns for recognition as the dominant force in Europe. Its military grows stronger by the day, its navy expanding to challenge Britain's control of the seas. France, proud but wounded from its humiliating defeat to Germany in 1871, burns with the desire for revenge and the recovery of its lost provinces, Alsace and Lorraine. Britain, ruler of the world's largest empire, watches warily as Germany's influence spreads. Its navy, the most powerful on earth, is its shield, but even it cannot protect against the growing uncertainty on the continent. In the east, the Russian Empire, vast and sprawling, is weighed down by its own internal struggles. It claims to stand as the protector of Slavic nations, yet its grip is weakened by revolutionaries and a crumbling autocracy. And in the center of it all, Austria-Hungary, a patchwork empire of ethnicities, languages, and religions, teeters on the edge of collapse, its leaders desperate to hold together a fragile union. The alliances that were meant to prevent war now seem to guarantee it. Germany is bound to Austria-Hungary through the Triple Alliance, along with Italy. Britain, France, and Russia stand united in the Triple Entente. Each treaty, each handshake between nations creates a chain reaction waiting to be triggered. A single spark in the wrong place could bring the entire system crashing down. This is a world defined by tension, a world where nationalism surges like a wildfire. Across Europe, people speak of destiny and greatness, but also of resentment and revenge. Leaders talk of peace but prepare for war. Military budgets swell as factories churn out weapons of unimaginable destruction, machine guns, dreadnought battleships, and long-range artillery. And then there is the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe. This volatile region, nestled between empires, is a hotbed of ambition and unrest. Serbia dreams of uniting all Slavs under its banner, a vision that threatens Austria-Hungary's very existence. Secret societies like the Black Hand plot in the shadows, determined to strike a blow against imperial rule. It is here, in the Balkans, that history would take a sharp and violent turn. Sarajevo, a city of charm and tension, where East meets West. On June 28, 1914, a single gunshot will ring out in its streets. The target, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. His death will unleash forces that have been building for decades, forces that will sweep across Europe, dragging millions into the deadliest conflict the world has ever known. But this is not just the story of a war. This is the story of how ambition, fear, pride, and miscalculation collided to reshape the world. The assassination of one man would set in motion events that would redraw borders, topple empires, and forever alter the lives of millions. This is the story of how the First World War began. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo wakes to the sound of church bells and the bustle of a city preparing for a grand event. The streets are lined with flags, banners, and citizens eager to catch a glimpse of their future emperor. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, has arrived in Bosnia to inspect imperial forces and promote unity in a region long fractured by ethnic tensions. Accompanying him is his beloved wife, Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, who defied royal protocol to stand by his side in public. But beneath the facade of celebration lies a city divided. For many Bosnians, Franz Ferdinand is a symbol of reform, a leader who envisions granting autonomy to ethnic minorities within the empire. For others, he is an invader, a representative of an empire that has crushed their dreams of independence. In the shadows, a group of young men gathers, united by their shared hatred of Austro-Hungarian rule. They are members of the Black Hand, a clandestine Serbian nationalist organization determined to end the empire's grip on the Balkans. Armed with pistols, bombs, and cyanide pills, these conspirators have only one goal: to kill the Archduke. As the motorcade winds through Sarajevo's narrow streets, the mood is jubilant but tense. Crowds cheer as Franz Ferdinand and Sophie wave from their open-top car, unaware of the danger lurking just feet away. At the Kumuria Bridge, the first assassin makes his move. A grenade is thrown, but it bounces off the car's folded roof and explodes behind them, wounding bystanders. Panic erupts. The motorcade speeds away, leaving behind smoke, screams, and confusion. Frustrated but undeterred, the Black Hand members scatter, each determined to find another opportunity. Hours later, as the Archduke insists on visiting the wounded at the hospital, his driver takes a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street. There, by sheer chance, Gavrilo Princip stands waiting. Princip hesitates for a moment, his heart pounding. Then, in an instant, he raises his pistol and fires. The first bullet strikes Sophie in the abdomen. The second hits Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Blood pours from the Archduke's mouth as he whispers his final words. "Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." But it is too late. Within minutes, both are dead. The streets of Sarajevo fall silent, the celebration turned into a nightmare. What was meant to be a day of goodwill becomes the spark that will ignite the greatest war the world has ever seen. News of the assassination spreads like wildfire. In Vienna, the imperial court is paralyzed by grief and fury. For Emperor Franz Joseph, the death of his nephew is both a personal loss and a direct challenge to the empire's authority. The question is no longer whether to act, but how. At the Hofburg Palace, Austria-Hungary's political and military elite gather in secret meetings. Chief among them is Foreign Minister Leopold von Berchtold, a man determined to use the tragedy as a pretext for war. To him and others, Serbia is more than a nuisance. It is a threat to the empire's survival, a breeding ground for rebellion and unrest. But Austria-Hungary cannot act alone. Its army is outdated, its resources stretched thin. For this, it turns to its most powerful ally, Germany. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II is quick to offer support. The Serbs must be punished, he declares, giving Austria-Hungary what history will call the blank check, a promise of unconditional backing, no matter the cost. Emboldened, Vienna begins drafting an ultimatum that is less a diplomatic note and more a declaration of war. The ultimatum, delivered to Serbia on July 23, 1914, contains 10 demands. Among them is the insistence that Austro-Hungarian officials be allowed to operate within Serbia to suppress anti-Austrian propaganda. For Serbia, these terms are impossible to accept in full. To do so would mean sacrificing its sovereignty. Serbian Prime Minister Nikola Pasic faces an impossible dilemma: agree to Austria's terms and submit to humiliation, or reject them and face war. After days of deliberation, Serbia responds, accepting most of the demands but rejecting the most invasive ones. It is a measured response, but Austria-Hungary dismisses it outright. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The machinery of conflict begins to turn. The declaration of war sets off a chain reaction that no one can stop. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II orders the mobilization of Russian forces to protect Serbia, its Slavic ally. This move sends shockwaves through Berlin, where German leaders see the threat of a two-front war looming. The German General Staff, led by Helmuth von Moltke, activates the Schlieffen Plan, a meticulously crafted strategy designed to neutralize France quickly before turning east to face Russia. It is a plan of precision and speed, but it leaves no room for diplomacy or error. In Paris, the French government braces for war, bound by its alliance with Russia. In London, Britain hesitates, torn between isolationism and its obligations to the Entente. But when German troops march into neutral Belgium on August 4th, Britain's decision is made. "We are at war with Germany," Prime Minister Asquith announces. Within weeks, the world is on the brink of catastrophe. The interlocking alliances that were meant to preserve peace have become chains pulling nations into conflict. What began as a localized dispute in the Balkans has now engulfed the great powers of Europe. July 23, 1914. In the quiet halls of diplomacy, the clock begins to tick. Austria-Hungary, emboldened by Germany's unwavering support, delivers an ultimatum to Serbia, a list of demands so severe, so intrusive, that no sovereign nation could fully accept them. The message is clear: submit to our control or face the consequences. Serbia, aware of the precarious balance, walks a fine line. The government agrees to nearly all of Austria-Hungary's demands, but one, the requirement to allow Austro-Hungarian investigators on Serbian soil, is rejected. It is a calculated move, an attempt to preserve dignity without provoking war. But for Vienna, it is not enough. In capitals across Europe, frantic telegrams crisscross the continent. The leaders of Europe, once connected by bloodlines and alliances, now communicate through strained and formal cables. Among these exchanges are the infamous Willy-Niki telegrams, a desperate correspondence between Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. "We must act to preserve peace," pleads Nicholas. "Mobilization is not war," he assures. But Wilhelm, ever distrustful, responds with warnings and ultimatums. "You must hold back your armies," he insists. What begins as an appeal for understanding quickly descends into veiled threats. Trust erodes with every word. The diplomats, too, struggle to find common ground. Ambassadors meet in grand rooms filled with maps, red-faced generals argue over timetables, and foreign ministers trade accusations. Each nation sees itself as the aggrieved party, its honor and survival at stake. By July 28th, the dam breaks. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, citing the assassination of Franz Ferdinand as a justification. The rivers of diplomacy have run dry, and Europe stands on the edge of a precipice. But the full weight of what is to come has yet to dawn on the leaders who signed the declarations, the generals who moved the pieces, or the soldiers who wait in silence for orders that will change their lives forever. War is declared, but the conflict is far from contained. Across Europe, the gears of mobilization begin to turn, slowly at first, then with unstoppable momentum. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II convenes his advisors. The question is no longer whether to act, but how far to go. Russia's partial mobilization is seen as a signal of strength, but to Germany, it is a direct threat. Germany, locked in its strategic doctrine, views Russia's actions as the first move in a game of survival. On August 1, 1914, Berlin sends its own declaration of war to St. Petersburg. 2 days later, France is drawn into the conflict, fulfilling its obligations to Russia. Germany's strategy is bold, almost audacious, the Schlieffen Plan. It is a gamble that assumes speed is the key to victory. German forces will sweep through neutral Belgium, bypassing French defenses, and strike at the heart of Paris. But this plan is not without consequences. Belgium, a small nation unprepared for the storm descending upon it, becomes the first casualty of Germany's ambition. The invasion provokes outrage across Europe, particularly in Britain. For London, the violation of Belgian neutrality is more than an affront. It is a call to arms. On August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany, completing the chain reaction that began with a single gunshot in Sarajevo. Within days, the alliances that were supposed to maintain peace now bind nations to war. Soldiers board trains with cheers and songs, unaware of the horrors awaiting them. Governments promise swift victories, but in the shadows of these grand proclamations, the seeds of unimaginable suffering are already being sown. As war spreads across Europe, the response from the public is anything but uniform. In Berlin, Vienna, and Paris, crowds gather in the streets, waving flags and singing anthems. Newspapers herald the call to arms, their headlines filled with patriotic fervor. Propaganda posters spring up overnight, urging men to enlist and women to support the war effort. But beneath the surface, the emotions are far more complex. In the countryside, where the realities of war are better understood, there is quiet apprehension. Farmers worry about their sons being sent to the front, mothers weep in private, and village squares fall silent as conscription orders arrive. In Britain, the government launches a massive propaganda campaign. Images of Belgian refugees flood the newspapers, accompanied by stories of atrocities committed by German soldiers. These accounts, whether exaggerated or true, ignite outrage and stir a sense of duty among the British public. Meanwhile, in Russia, the mood is mixed. In cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, nationalist rallies draw thousands, but in the rural heartland, the war feels distant and irrelevant. For the peasantry, survival remains the primary concern, and loyalty to the Tsar is overshadowed by the daily struggle to put food on the table. Everywhere, the media shapes perception. Artists, writers, and journalists become tools of the state, crafting narratives that glorify the war effort and demonize the enemy. But for every poster of a heroic soldier, there are whispered doubts, private fears, and the unspoken question, how long can this last? The world had been holding its breath, and now, with a single resounding clash, it exhaled in a roar. August 1914. The war that had been steadily building for decades was now a brutal reality. In Belgium, the first wave of violence strikes with unrelenting force. German forces, moving with speed and precision, invade the neutral country, bypassing its defenses and making a direct push into France. The plan is simple, yet devastating. Sweep through Belgium, cut across northern France, and capture Paris. Decisive action that would shatter French resolve and end the war before it truly began. But the plan does not go as smoothly as expected. The Germans, confident in their military might, meet fierce resistance. Belgian civilians are caught between their soldiers' efforts to fight back and the oncoming tide of an unstoppable enemy. Cities burn. Lives are lost in the blink of an eye, and in the trenches, the horrors of modern warfare begin to take shape. The machine gun, a weapon of mass destruction, is deployed in overwhelming numbers, cutting down men by the hundreds. The trench systems, deep and labyrinthine, stretch across the fields of Belgium and northern France like scar tissue. Soldiers, once men of purpose and pride, are now huddled in mud, fighting for survival rather than glory. The battlefields are littered with the torn bodies of those who once marched with hope. The very air is thick with the stench of death, gunpowder, and the cries of those lost to a cause no one truly understands. But the war is not confined to the European heartland. Across the globe, colonies are drawn into the conflict. Soldiers from India, Africa, and the Pacific Islands are called upon to serve, fighting in places they have never seen for causes they may never comprehend. It is not just Europe that is consumed, it is the world. Colonies become battlegrounds, and the war's reach stretches beyond the maps of Europe, becoming a truly global struggle. The war has begun, but the cost is already unfathomable. In just a few short weeks, the world's geopolitical landscape is unrecognizably altered. Cities that had stood for centuries now lay in ruin. In the trenches, men fight not just for victory, but for survival. Casualties pile up at a staggering rate, and with each death, the line between victory and defeat blurs further. The initial loss of life is staggering, but it is only a glimpse into the hell that lies ahead. Thousands, no millions of men are torn from their homes, from their families, to face the chaos of war. The impact is not just felt on the front lines. The entire fabric of Europe is being torn apart. Refugees flood into neighboring countries, fleeing the destruction of their homes, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weight of a life disrupted. Entire towns are erased from the maps, forgotten in the rush of political agendas. The refugees, the displaced, are left without a nation, without a future. Politically, the death of diplomacy is as certain as the death of the men on the battlefield. The old European order, the delicate balance that had once maintained peace, is gone. The alliances, which were meant to preserve stability, have now become instruments of destruction. Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia, and France, each driven by national interests, care nothing for the casualties of this game. The intricate web of diplomacy that once connected these nations has been destroyed, replaced by a brutal reality where the cost of failure is far too high to ignore. As the world falls deeper into the chaos of World War I, the question arises, was this conflict avoidable? Could the assassination of Franz Ferdinand have been contained, its aftermath diffused through diplomacy, negotiation, or restraint? The legacy of the July crisis, the death of a single man, the failure of diplomacy, the rigidity of alliances, becomes the template for future wars. The horrors of this conflict are not limited to the millions of lives lost, but to the political shifts it catalyzed. World War I marked the end of an era. The peace that followed was fragile, and the repercussions would echo across the 20th century. It was not just a war, it was the birth of modern warfare, the birth of a new world order. Yet, there is no certainty in the answers. Was it truly inevitable? Could the alliances have been dismantled? Could the powers have taken a different path, one that avoided the slaughter of an entire generation? The question remains unanswered. What is certain is that the world after the war would never be the same. New borders would be drawn, new powers would rise, and the scars left by the war would linger for decades, laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The war may have ended, but its consequences would define the course of history for a century to come. Imagine for a moment that you stand in the shoes of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the leader of one of the world's most powerful empires. A world teetering on the edge of war. What do? You've received news of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and your ally, Austria-Hungary, is demanding your support. A delicate decision lies ahead: to stand with your allies or to caution against the precipice of war. The weight of your choice could alter the course of history. Would you have made the same decision as Wilhelm? Or would you have sought another way, a path of peace? The events of that summer of 1914 were shaped by the decisions of men like Wilhelm, who stood at the crossroads of history, unaware of the cataclysm that was about to unfold. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below, and as we explore the choices made in the corridors of power, think carefully about the consequences of those decisions. The clock is ticking, and the choices are narrowing. By the end of this pivotal summer, one decision in Berlin will send shockwaves across the globe. Austria-Hungary's ultimatum has been delivered. Serbia has responded, but it is not enough to calm the raging tide of anger. Kaiser Wilhelm has made his choice. He has pledged unconditional support to Austria-Hungary, issuing a blank check that promises nothing less than war. In just a matter of days, nations that once stood at the precipice of peace are now being dragged into a brutal, unrelenting conflict. What started as a localized assassination is now threatening to engulf Europe. Could this moment have been avoided? Was there a path that led to a different outcome? Or was it too late? Stay with me, because in a moment we'll explore how that one decision, made in a small office in Berlin, sealed the fate of Europe and the world. The war is now in full swing. The chaos unleashed in August 1914 cannot be undone, and the world has changed forever. But as we look back on the July crisis and the decisions that led to the outbreak of World War I, we must ask ourselves, could it have been avoided? We saw how miscommunication, mistrust, and the rigidness of military timetables sealed Europe's fate. Leaders were forced to make decisions in moments of incredible pressure, decisions that led to the deaths of millions. But at the heart of it all is the question of diplomacy. Was there a way to avert the war? Could negotiations, compromise, or even a simple pause for reflection have stopped the July crisis from turning into a global disaster? As we close this chapter of history, I ask you to reflect. Do you think diplomacy could have stopped the July crisis? Could Europe have found another path, or was war inevitable from the moment that fateful shot rang out in Sarajevo? Share your thoughts below, and let's continue the conversation about the lessons learned from this momentous turning point in history. It began with a single bullet fired in Sarajevo, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an event so seemingly small, so contained, it could have easily faded into the annals of history. But instead, it set off a chain of events that would shatter the peace of Europe and change the world forever. The July crisis unfolded with incredible speed as the complex web of alliances, the demands of imperial ambitions, and the calculations of world leaders led to one fateful conclusion: war. As nations mobilized, the balance of power tilted precariously, with millions of lives at stake. The decisions made in Berlin, Vienna, St. Petersburg, and London were not just about politics or strategy. They were about real human lives. Lives that would be lost on battlefields, in the trenches, and in the wake of a conflict that could have been avoided. Yet despite the warnings, despite the mounting tension, the world marched blindly into a war that would kill millions and reshape the borders of Europe. The questions still echo to this day. Could diplomacy have altered the course of events? Could the leaders of 1914 have acted differently, chosen peace over conflict, and spared the world the horrors of the Great War? The July crisis teaches us something about the fragility of peace, about the dangers of rigid alliances, and about the catastrophic consequences of miscalculation. And perhaps most importantly, it offers us a stark lesson about the cost of war, both the lives lost and the world forever altered. But as we look back, we must ask, what lessons can we learn from the past? What do the choices of those leaders tell us about leadership, alliances, and the cost of war today? Could we, in our modern world, avoid the same missteps? Or are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past, caught in the web of power, alliances, and the weight of decisions made in moments of crisis? As we conclude our exploration of the July crisis, we cannot forget the human cost of the decisions made. But this is only the beginning of the story. In our next episode, we'll journey deeper into the heart of the conflict, the trenches of World War I. We'll explore the untold human stories behind the headlines, the personal accounts of soldiers, civilians, and families torn apart by a war that reshaped history. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the trenches, where survival and humanity were tested to their limits. The horrors, the heroism, the moments of despair and courage, they all intersected in the depths of the war that followed the July crisis. And as we turn the page to this next chapter, we will come face to face with the real cost of the decisions made in 1914.